welcome and very good afternoon to all of you. Thanks for taking time out. We are here, gathered here around this table today to have a conversation on a topic that has been in the headlines for a while now, in fact, for a very long time now. And there have been suggestions at times that it is imminent and at times that it is not so imminent. But I think the conversation around it has not died down, and it continues to evoke a range of issues, because this is not simply an issue about military and how effective a military as a fighting machine would be after this restructuring. But it is also a fundamental issue about the issues that it raises surround in India's national security strategy. They surround India's higher defense institutional architecture. They're about finance. They're about civil-military relations, and they're also about inter-services relations. So some of those issues perhaps we can tackle today in this conversation. And to understand where this debate is coming from and perhaps where we are going, we have gathered a great set of people around us, around this table. General Shukla, Vice Marshal Gulani, Admiral Arun Prakash, and Amrita Datta from Indian Express. And the idea here is to deliberate what is often not discussed openly. What is the role of these theater commands as we think about higher defense organization today? Why is the debate stuck? Why are we so late in thinking about our higher defense restructuring? What are the operational and tactical challenges that revolve around this higher restructuring? What challenges will it evoke in terms of financing? And what it means for inter-services coordination? Jointness or integration is a term that has long been in the making, that we have been hearing about for a very long time. But the challenges abound, as we have seen, just in terms of implementing the desire of the government to have integrated theater commands as it was articulated a few years back, in fact. So to begin with, let me invite General Shukla first. General Shukla, if you can give a brief overview of what this debate is all about at the end of the day. We know that a lot of discussion has happened for a very long time. Various reports have recommended it for a very long time. Why is it that we have been so late into acknowledging the need for it? And has the time come today that we should finally make the move and go to the final stage and declare that there's something out there that needs to be implemented?
So we're going to do it on a Q&A basis? Okay. So, you see, it is long overdue. I mean, there should be no question, as in my view, as to why theatre command should not have been done 6 to 7 years back. And see, I would like to make a larger point that today national security is getting so complex and sophisticated. It is changing by the day and the hour and the minute. So theatre commands, if I may just, make a brief comparison, if jointmanship is summit Everest, theatre commands are one spur at the foothills. There's a huge journey to go. I'll just make 2 points, very quick points. See the American experience and the Chinese experience of theatre commands. So we all know, or let me put it this way, where are we in India? We have created a CDS, and of course it's a game-changing step. But creation of the CDS is akin to what the Americans did in 1949 when they had a permanent chairman joint chiefs. That's all. We haven't moved anywhere down. Look at what it took the Americans. It took the Vietnam disaster. It took the Desert One fiasco for them to unleash Barry Goldwater Nichols, which laid the basis for operational integration. And they also did it over 10 to 20 years. So, people used to, 1949 phase was called coordinated jointness. Then they go to what is Gulf War 1, which is deconflicted operations. You merely manage to deconflict. It is in Afghanistan and what was it called? Anyway, whatever it was, Afghanistan, that they begin to discover joint operations. And finally, they take, what they call the speed, tempo, and lethality of operations to a new high in Gulf War 2. And that is when you get, a Bradley tank commander directly commandeering an F-16, F-18 onto the target, across domains and all that. So this is the American experience. And where are we in 49? We have not even set up theatre commands. So it's a huge travel. And look at how the game is changing. Who was watching this business, this Recce strike complex so intently? The PRC and the CCP and the PLA. And what do? They, of course, set up the theater commands. And see, this is the question when we compare ourselves with China. People say open society, closed minds. Closed society, open minds. Look at them. Once they decided in 1 year, one fell swoop, you have theater commands. And what they do thereafter, they watch this Recce strike complex and take this plan, or shall I say, mold it to an ambitious endeavor in form of the rocket force and the strategic support. What are they doing? This is what we must watch. They are integrating across 8 domains: land, sea, air, subsea, seabed, space, cyber, EW, and not one theory. I'll give you an example of what they are doing. And they integrate platforms and sensors across these domains to produce the rocket force and the strategic support force. As a result of which the Chinese rocket force, I'm quoting Admiral Prakash, the commander of the Pacific Fleet and now IPACOM C-in-C designate, he says the DF-21s and D-26s have redone the principles of naval warfare in the Pacific. And look at the strategic military consequences, the point you were referring to. It seriously threatens America's force projection into the Western Pacific, their commitment to treaty allies. So it is, of course, operational integration with huge geopolitical effects. In my view, we don't even sense what this will do. And we are stuck in silly debates about those. Sorry to use this word, I don't wish to be offensive. I'm just trying to emphasize about those 21 C-in-Cs, how they will be distributed. That is not the issue. The issue is this huge outcome and today, what we are saying, theater command, jointmanship, I said is the spur. See what is happening. Across armies, USA, China, Turkey, this, that, and the other, the whole game is moving to cross-pollination. Means civilians just in April, the Craig Martel has, launched that project, Task Force Lima, which is to drive generative AI through the Pentagon military. CENTCOM last month has appointed, Dr. Andrew Moore, the vice president of Google Cloud. He's taken a pay cut to drive AI. Does the Indian military not want all this? AI, robotics, look at how talent pipelines are changing. The most striking example is Li Shangfu, the Chinese defense minister. He has been deputy commander of rocket force and he's commanded a satellite center. Can you imagine this in the Indian context? That an Indian military officer commands a rocket force and commands ISRO center. Look at his understanding of long-range precision, how they will put space, cyber together. So my simple question is, this is the way the world is moving. और हमने ये इत्मीनान कर रखा है कि साहब आराम से होगा 70 साल कोई ज़रूरत नहीं. There will be grim consequences. If they are grim consequences for national security, and may I also say this, for the first time it appears to me in my 70 years, let Admiral Prakash join in, we used to always say that the politician is behind us. He can't understand. Today, it's the military leadership, civil, military, technological leadership which is behind the curve. The politician is telling you do this, we say, they do this, we can't do this. So it is a very serious debate. It is not about jointmanship. It is about what are we going to do to our national security makeover. So today, this whole debate of jointmanship is far beyond the 3 services. MOD should be cross-pollinated in the manner of this, Craig Martel. Why? And I'm saying these questions should come from the services. They should demand. Let me make one last point of how things are evolving. Just look at space. The astrophysics of space for defense is totally different from the astrophysics of space for exploration. So Chandrayaan and all is a very creditable, but it's got nothing to do with your military capacities in space. And one last point, see how this game is changing. So what have the Chinese done? Sometimes I don't think it has sunk into us. The rocket force and strategic support force are 2 separate services. It is like raising the army and the navy, provided it delivers operationally. If it delivers those outcomes. Now, it's an extremely ambitious plan. In the last 10 years, if there is one command which has been upgraded to combatant command status in the US, it is SpaceCom, cyber. In our case, I feel that we do not understand the deeper nuances of this debate, and therefore, and may I make one short point since I'm in a think tank. Outside, these debates are being driven by think tanks. The military is being held to account. Here, there doesn't seem to be any pressure on the military. They should be answering these questions. I included, 1 year back. But there don't seem to be these kinds of pressures. So I'm saying it is a very substantive issue. It's critical to our national security. And if we are negligent of these steps that we are taking, there will be very dire consequences. That is my view. I wonder what Marshal Gulani and Admiral Prakash have to say.
Admiral Prakash, so we come to you now, and as General Shukla mentioned, it is not only a question of inter-services coordination or jointsmanship anymore. It's a question of national security survival almost, given how profound changes are taking place around our periphery, and especially what has happened in China. So, if we can come to you and ask your views on why are we behind the curve, and why has it taken us so long to acknowledge the fact that this is an important change that needs to be perhaps imbibed, or if not imbibed, emulated from what others are doing. So where are we stuck, and where do we go from here?
Okay, I agree with General Shukla that it's an existential issue, and the very fact that China is taking liberties with us, has been taking liberties with us for the last few years, is an indication that they've read the tea leaves. They know that how confused we are on issues related to national security. We are, of course, 70 years plus behind what the USA did. But we are also exactly 22 years behind what our own group of ministers said in 2001. I happen to be a part of one of the task forces. They said quite clearly in 2001 in a report which they produced within a record time of 6 months. That group was headed by the Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Advani. It recommended everything that we haven't done so far, except to create the Chief of Defense Staff. 11 years ago, Mr. Naresh Chandra, experienced bureaucrat, headed another committee which again reviewed national security shortcomings and made recommendations on the similar lines as the group of ministers. Nothing happened. 3 years ago, we constituted a Chief of Defense Staff and a Department of Military Affairs, but very little has happened. Now, I am an outsider. I only go by what I read in the media, etc. And perhaps it may not be fair to make any comments on what goes on inside the armed forces. But purely from what I see, hear, and read is the fact that, again, we've not been able to get our act together because of internal disagreement. What I would think, at least in my times, it used to be myopia and parochialism within the armed forces. Now, that is something, it's a phenomenon that's universal. It's happened everywhere. Wherever they tried to reform the armed forces or the national security system, there was resistance. In the UK, in the United States, there was a revolt of the admirals. One service or the other is always opposed to reform because of, the loss of turf or loss of ranks or whatever it is. My point is, Raj Shukla seems to think that it is the services who are to be blamed. I differ slightly. Services have always traditionally been opposed to reform. They've been conservative out of purely selfishness or myopia or whatever you may say. It is the politician who has driven, far-sighted, visionary politicians the world over have driven reform. In the UK, it was people like Duncan Sands and Heseltine and John Knott. In the USA, it was people like Rumsfeld and Weinberger and so on. Most of them happened to have a military background. They knew what national security was all about. Unfortunately, in our environment, the politician is so engrossed in electioneering. That takes up about 99% of his time. And national security takes a backseat. So it has to be a visionary Minister of Defense who has a comprehension of national security issues, right from nuclear deterrence, conventional deterrence, and issues like that, to understand why is it necessary to reform. Today, we are sitting in 17 commands, geographically dispersed all over the country. Should we have the misfortune of going into war, there will be total chaos. There will be resistance from within the services. I don't want to name any service, but there will be one service or the other who will resist it for various reasons which will be produced. Now, if the politician is going to listen to all these reasons, then of course we can wait till the cows come home. The price we are paying is that other countries, our adversaries, understand how loose and vague our perception of national security is, and they're taking full advantage. If we had a China strategy, if we had a national security strategy and a China strategy, then China would have thought 10 times before doing what they have. Because the Chinese, since 1995, produce a white paper every 2 years with great regularity. It's a public document, and it's an eye opener to read that document. It talks about what the roles, missions, aims, national objectives. It talks about the defense budget. It talks about what are the priorities. And here we keep arguing about whether we should have 2 aircraft carriers or 3 or 20 squadrons or 45 squadrons. So there's a lack of direction from the top. I mean, constituting a CDS and Department of Military Affairs was, I accept, a great step. One of the most radical steps that have been taken since independence, no doubt. But what after that? I mean, just pushing out a piece of paper and saying there shall be a CDS and there shall be. How will CDS proceed? He doesn't seem to know. We've had 2 CDS, we've got the second CDS is in the chair. But nobody seems to know how to proceed, especially when there is opposition at every step. So, firstly, there has to be a vision. Then there has to be guidance. I mean, if the politician doesn't know what to do, then he can ask. And then the armed forces or the CDS, the Department of Military Affairs, should guide him that this is the way to go and let's get on with it. So otherwise, if we keep waiting, then I don't think anything will happen. And lastly, I think we've also got the wrong end of the stick, because the piece of paper, the PIB handout, which I have had access to, said the following. I'm going to read out this. It said, the CDS will facilitate restructuring of military command for optimal utilization of resources and bring about jointness, etc., etc. There is no time limit to this. Then it says, I'm talking about what is called theaterization. It's a new word coined by the military called theaterization. It will be done in due course. But where it lays down a 3-year time limit, as it says, to bring about jointness in operations, logistics, transport, etc., etc., within 3 years of the first CDS taking post. Those 3 years are almost over, or actually over. Nothing much has happened. So in this time, we should have started the process of creating jointness by, training young officers to be joint staff officers, etc. To start with, we should have altered the nomenclature of our Defense Services Staff College to Joint Services Staff College. In 3 years, we would have produced 400 or 500 joint staff officers. So we have, sort of lost ourselves in trying to chase something called theaterization. In the bargain, we have not even made any progress in creating jointness and structures, etc. There's much that the chiefs and the chiefs of staff committee can do by themselves without even waiting for political direction, which is absent, of course. So I think these are the issues that we should expect opposition and even resistance from the services for one reason or the other. That resistance has to be overridden, and that can only happen at the political level. And the politician will only do this if he understands the grave implications of not doing anything and finds time from electioneering and so on. And if the government were to ask me, which it won't, we need to appoint a non-political defense minister who does not have to go to his constituency, go for electioneering and things like that, so that he can get on with the business of national security and without wasting any further time. Yes, I know, Harsh, you're smiling.
Thank you. No, thank you, sir. I think that's a very radical idea you have proposed, and I'm sure someone here will have some things to say on that. But I'll come to Air Vice Marshal Gulani now, and pardon me for saying this, but Air Force has been seen as part of the problem in this debate that has come out, whatever we read in the media. And, we have heard both Admiral Prakash and General Shukla talking about the need for it and the need which is slightly immediate than a long-term prognosis of how things are moving. So, when you look at it from a service perspective, what are the key questions that you are asking that perhaps will lead to a more effective, integration, or perhaps there is a fundamental problem with the way we are thinking about it from your perspective? Because I think this is an important inter-services conversation that we are trying to bring out in the open, in the spirit that General Shukla said think tanks should be doing much more about it. So, sir.
Harsh, for getting me over, and thank you, Admiral Prakash and General Raj Shukla, for your comments. I think from the Air Force's, I would say Air Force's perspective, or my perspective, the way I see it, firstly, I think theatre commands are being projected as a magic bullet, which, if formed, is going to solve all your problems. It is not the structures that we must look at. It is the emphasis on more on who commands what and who controls what. In my opinion, I think unity of effort is more important. If I have to do war fighting today, how can I bring to bear the maximum force, whether it is Army, Navy, and Air Force, collectively together onto the adversary, is what I must look at, whether it's space, cyber, emerging technologies, whatever you may have. The problem is that even today, the planning is done in single service silos. Planning for operations is not being done collectively as a joint organization. And unless we change our mindsets towards this, I think that is where the major problem is. Because although each service has its own culture, ethos, way of fighting wars, which is essential and which needs to be protected, but when we are together, I think at the top level, we have to shed these parochial tendencies or lanyard to the service. Air Force, unfortunately, is always, being projected as a spoil sport in this whole debate, while actually it is not. The Air Force has never been against joint war fighting. And if you go back in history, I think the Air Force always took the lead to establish joint structures from the Army up to the TAC level and the Navy at the command headquarters level. I have been AOC, Maritime Air Operations, and I know Admiral Prakash is here. How many times I have been called by the C-in-C to discuss the war plans? I have been in ANC as as the component commander. While you've got a structure of the Andaman and Nicobar Command, which is a good test bed for jointness in terms of planning and execution, why have we failed to execute it on the land or elsewhere outside, is the question that we need to ask. And how we need to ask this question is, I think unless the three services sit down together and make a joint problem statement, which is a consensus, while today everybody agrees, the Army, Navy, and Air Force, that we need to fight the war together. Unfortunately, we look at models of America, we look at models of China. Our geography is different, our threats are different, our challenges are different, and we have to build something which is going to suit our requirement. To give you an example, I think Admiral Prakash mentioned of this 3 years time frame in the PIB. If you look at the past 3 years, when the first CDS came, this talk of Air Defense Command came into being. And it was as if the Air Defense Command is going to be formed tomorrow. It took us 3.5, 4 years to realize that it is a bad idea. It is not going to work. God forbid if that had been implemented, where would we have been today? So my only point is that I understand that we need to fight together, but my only contention is that we must make haste slowly unless we have a consensus as to how we go about, because once you've done this damage, it will take us another 50 years to undo this damage. That's my point.
Amrita, so we have had initial set of remarks from three veterans who have looked at this question from their perspective and from the perspective of what it means for India's war fighting capability. Looking as an outsider, you have covered this debate now for a while. What are the important axes through which you are evaluating this debate? I mean, because this is a question of course, we talk of war fighting effectiveness, but there is also the question of finances, right? Absolutely. You will never have enough money to satisfy armed forces. No country can do that. So is it also a question of finance being an important consideration and the limited resources being an important consideration in the way we are thinking about how we organize our defense structures and what it means for the general public? Why is this debate important for someone who's just interested in national security issues? So since you've covered it long enough and you've written about it, how do you cover it as a reporter?
First of all, thank you for having me over. I would like to talk from the point of view of the public or the readers, because that's how we write our report. We think what the readers effectively would like to know about theatre commands. So I personally feel that the most important question that needs to be answered right now is, what are the national capabilities that we are looking at when we create theaterization? How will the integrated defensive structure, how will they improve once the theatre commands come up over the current service-oriented structures? which of course, the people know they have been tried and tested in the past. We have fought previous wars with them. So with things emerging, what is the national capability? How will it benefit how will the move benefit us as a country? That is something that is still not very clear to the public,
So you, pardon me, but so you think this case has not been made by the policymakers, or this case has not been made by other stakeholders, including the services?
I would say that there is a lack of strategic communication. I don't know how much the services talk among themselves. Clearly, the debate between the spat, rather, between the former CDS and the former Air Force chief shows that there is no proper talk between the services as well. But I also feel that there should be a proper setup of tri-services strategic communication setup if we are talking so much about jointness, so that these basic questions on how is this going to benefit us as a country, should be clear. Because war fighting is a national effort. So if we don't know how things are going to pan out with the creation of such an important structures over existing structures which have been placed and which have worked beautifully in the past, in the previous wars. So how this is going to change that? So that is not very clear as of now. Secondly, the question you asked about the finance bit of it. So far, the discourse on theaterization has only been about creating an additional headquarter, right? We're talking about the 4 stars. We're talking about parallel structures that the chiefs will do, raise, train, and sustain, and the theater commanders will be operational commanders. So we have only talked about the top tier. We don't know what the second tier or the third tier is going to be like as of now. So if you're talking about creating an additional headquarter, clearly that involves a lot of costs. And it needs to be told to the public how that is justifiable at a time when we don't have enough funds to buy very critical assets. So that clearly is an issue. And yes, as I just said, being a national effort, there should be a very free-flowing communication. There should be a proper structured mechanism so that people know that how is this going to benefit us. That's a question, a very basic question that's not very clear to the public right now.
Sir, General Shukla, so I think you wanted to intervene on some of the things, but I also wanted to raise one question, which I think has been Admiral Prakash also talked about. Jointness, and how do you create jointness? Because there is a problem there that our services are not joint. I mean, in terms of education, in terms of training, in terms of where do we begin thinking about jointness? There's still a sense of parochialism that seeps through. Now, having a higher defense organization that takes care of this at the highest of levels, would it be an effective way of countering this, or there is something else that the services should also start doing, perhaps should have started doing much earlier than today?
Yeah, so just let me make 3 points. One is about the Air Force's reservations, which I think is a misnomer, and I'll tell you why. The second point is what should we do in terms of practical steps. Theatre commands are not a one-trick pony. If theatre command doesn't happen, the rest should not happen. The rest should happen. And if the rest happens, theatre commands, under the pressure of what is happening, will automatically happen. And the third is the issue which Amrita raised of budgeting. I have views on all 3 issues. See, about this Air Force bit. When I was doing NDC, we were told that the Air Force is, and the way NDC is. So we said when the Air Chief appears, we will ask him this very sharp question and he'll fall off his seat. And Admiral Air Marshal Brown was asked, are you opposed to the CDS? He said no. And he gave some reasons why the CDS should be set up in a particular manner, which are all the reasons which Admiral Arun Prakash will say, anybody would say. So he said no. When the CDS was appointed, where was the Air Force's objection? Everybody has reservations. I'm told, on no authority, but I'm told that some consensus has been reached even now. It is just in the nitty-gritty that it is happening. But this painting the Air Force as the perennial villain may not be fair. Do they have reservations? They do. I was told that the Air Force put up this issue of AD command. It later on turned out that they didn't want it. You see, so therefore, I agree that they have to be thought through very carefully. But Gulani, we are competent of thinking through this bit in 10 days, 15 days, and then getting along with it. Now, this is where we start being dishonest. There will be no perfect structure. Start them off. For example, if I'm an Air Force officer, and I'm told today, you set up a multi-domain command, space, cyber, AI, Pick up the brightest officer who's going to be a potential chief and CDS. Why will he not do it? Will it not be a matter of pride for him? Why should you go only to the Northern Theatre or these? We also have to grow in our mindsets. Is that not the future? So I don't understand why this cannot be done. The Air Force can be given that. Other practical issues, why it doesn't happen in the Indian context. You see, our PME design, I'm quoting for an American document. I couldn't figure out which one, but this was in my notes somewhere. What is the American PME design, professional military education? To grow a cadre of officers bedrocked in single service proficiencies, schooled in integrated combat, as also professionals with a wide-angled view of national security. The latter is not happening. So by the time our people reach 2-star, 3-star, very honestly, they are not in a position to take. Once they see the larger issues, these are very small impediments on the way. There are very large issues. Ultimately, it's going to be a win-win project. I agree with Admiral Arun Prakash. The damage starts in Staff College, where you present an air plan and an army plan. The first organization which should become tri-service is Staff College. Let the commandant be from the Air Force or the Navy, the best man for the job. Have 3 different divisions, but integrated. They can be headed by an Air Force and have a joint curriculum. The IAS today, I mean, they are dealing with every issue at the age of 25, 30. Defense services officers will start learning national security at 56. It must start. Have a compulsory entrance exam and not a service option that I will now give it, I will not give it. A tough exam so that this bit of, a basic, well-rounded education that you get there. When I was Commander High Command Wing, suggestions were asked. We designed a whole curriculum for a joint high command. It should happen immediately. No excuses. NDC, we can have a very joint curriculum. It is the first command or one of the first commands to become joint is RTRAC equivalent. Shed training to the services. RTRAC should look at what other armies are doing. Futures. There are big issues designing national security futures. The Marine Corps has turned out a document, Talent Management 2035. Read it. It's a exercise in humility to say that we do not have the competence to get these kind of people. Futures. Army Futures Command in the US has been set up to drive innovation. RTRAC should be tasked with driving innovation. And of course, once you have a joint profile, your thinking will get joint. Once your thinking will get joint, execution will happen here. 2 to 3 more practical steps I will just tell you. The CISC should be a 4-star with a 4 to 5 year tenure. He should do this day-to-day sorting out with the service chiefs and leave the CDS to operate in the strategic military domain, which he is meant to do. This is what the CDS was. There are succession measures. The CDS should sit on the boards of all 3 stars. All 3 stars should know their future is going to be joint. These are practical measures taken in other armies, which we hesitated to take in the name of consensus. What happens to the service chiefs? Their roles will not be diluted. The UK experience, American experience is the other way around. In many places, their salience has been restored in operations. The CDS board has been strengthened so that all operational decisions, the theater level decisions are taken by theater commanders, but the strategic level decisions are taken by this Pentagon, I don't know what they call it, they have a slang for it, and the UK has an equivalent, where it's a very powerful Chiefs of Staff committee, one that you cannot, so I'm saying it's going to be win-win for all. This misnomer that in USA, the CDS does not have an operational role. See, it's very subtle. He has a big say in the strategic military decision making, but he doesn't own the plans so that he doesn't have to defend them. He emerges as an independent advisor to the political class. So I'm saying this whole jointmanship business is a very subtle thing. It needs a lot of measures. For example, if theater commands, there is no consensus. Why can't an AI advisor be appointed day after? Why can't we say, okay, we are working on AI-enabled Northern Theater? What is stopping us? Why can't we get a tri-service cloud going? That is what the strategic support force is doing. और अगर हर चीज का बहाना है, तब तो फिर then it's an entirely different matter. And once all these, I'm an Air Force chief. If all around me these things are happening, civilians coming in, AI happening, will I remain stuck to my stand even if I have a stand? No, it will be shoved to one corner. So I'm saying jointness is an idea whose time has come. Nobody could stop it. But what amazes me, चलो अगर एयरफोर्स नहीं मान रही, बाकी चीजें क्यों नहीं हो सकती? स्टाफ कॉलेज में तो एयरफोर्स कुछ नहीं कर रहा है, जॉइंट हाई कमांड कोर्स क्यों नहीं हो रहा है? So for a strange set of reasons, these things. But I'm told that a consensus has been reached, and it is for 3 theaters, one for the adversaries, one for the maritime. Here I say, now let's get bold. The USA has 44 4-stars. There are 130 secretaries to the government of India. Why can't the theater commanders be 4 stars? They should have a quasi-diplomatic profile. The one looking at China should also be looking at Burma. Don't we want military foreign policy integration? The political class is talking. The Home Minister, I've heard surprisingly the Home Minister saying that one of the objectives of the government is to get defense out of the shadows of foreign policy. What does it mean? So I'm saying there are a whole lot of ideas. They must be implemented. Last point I'd like to make, Amrita read about budgeting. See, also just look at this. USA's defense budget is thrice that of China. China's defense budget is thrice that of India. Why is it that China is causing displacement anxiety in Pentagon and we are not causing simply similar displacement anxiety in Beijing? Because we are not doing this other stuff. It's not a matter of budgets. If you're not going to do structural corrections, cultural transitions, talent, nothing, it's not a matter of budgets alone. Also, we need to carefully study. I have read in The Economist that even as China has added military muscle, it is not with spiraling costs. I'm told their defense expenditure in 1995 was 2.7% of GDP. It has now come down to 1.9. I know they do all that stuff, but it needs to be weighed. It is not a matter. And my last point, of course, deterrence is costly. But was costlier? Ask Ukraine. I mean, Walter Mead says that we have entered the era of pre-war, 2014. Look at what's happening in the Western Pacific. Everybody's worried. Xi is worried about his own army's readiness. And can you hear me sit back and say that, no, wars are costly? I mean, all these excuses, given India's very adverse strategic circumstance, to me don't make much sense. A lot more needs to be done. There's no time for excuses. That's my point.
So, Admiral Prakash, you've heard some of the comments. Perhaps you want to engage with some of them. But this question that you very tantalizingly ended your speech saying that we can have a defense minister who is not a political who's not a politician. Now, of course, that's very unlikely in the foreseeable future. But if we think in terms of the civil-military relationship. As it has existed in India and as it exists today, there have always been challenges. But do you also see that bit as part of a problem in terms of two-way communication and what Amrita also mentioned, then communicating it to the rest of the public, why this thing is important or why this thing is critical from India's national security perspectives? Sir.
Okay, I think long ago we had a Rajya Raksha Mantri, who was a scientist, I forget, not Sarabhai.
Arun
but sorry?
Arun Singh.
No, not Arun Singh. He was a scientist.
Raja
Raja Ramanna, yeah. He was totally non-political, doing a very good job, scientist. All right. Firstly, the young lady's question about, people's money and they would like to know, are we going to make any saving? Yes, indeed. Perhaps it's not a coincidence that when China undertook these reforms in 2014, they revamped the regional commands into theater commands. They also cut their strength by 300,000 soldiers, 3 lakh soldiers. They created a joint logistic support force. So we've also been asked, our CDS has been asked to bring about jointness in logistics, transport, training, support services, communication. And each service has one of these. Each service has a training command, we have mechanical transport maintenance, we have engine maintenance, and much of it is common. Helicopter schools, there are 2 or 3 helicopter schools. So you have to shut down 2 and create 1, but then 2 services will lose. So there's great reluctance amongst the services itself. And yes, you will make immense savings, economy of effort if you go joint in earnest. Okay. Secondly, I think there is a problem with air power, and I think it's time to put this on the table and face it. There has traditionally been a problem with air power. It started in the USA in 1949 when they passed the first act. The Air Force, US Air Force, was most unhappy about roles and missions, and they had within days of the act being passed, there was a big firefight between the 3 services. So the US Defense Secretary, that is the Minister of Defense, took the 3 chiefs to some seaside resort in Key West, and he locked up all 4 of them for the weekend, and they came out with a MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, as to who will do what, which service will do what. And the Air Force's apprehensions are understandable because Air Force believes itself to be the purveyor of air power. Unfortunately, everybody wants a share of air power, and they've got their share. The Navy has its share, the Army has its share, the Coast Guard has it, even the BSF has air power. So there is a level of insecurity in the Air Force that if this, and two other things, the Air Force hates to put air assets under the command of anyone not wearing a blue uniform. And B, they also believe that the exploitation of air power is only known to Air Force officers, whether stated or unstated. So I think these issues need to be put on the table. The chiefs need to discuss them thoroughly, because in a joint organization, and I have commanded the Andaman Nicobar Command, there are component commanders from each service. So when it comes to air power under an army officer, army general, there will be an Air Force component commander, a 3-star or even a 4-star officer, who will advise him how to utilize air power. But to keep stalling this whole process on these grounds that people don't know how to exploit air power, and we need to obtain air dominance within the first week, etc., are issues, yes, but they need to be accepted, put on the table, and debated between the three chiefs and the CDS and the Raksha Mantri. He needs to be explained why this delay, why is the Air Force objecting, and how it can be overcome. Okay, about the civil-military issue, yes, for decades, the armed forces headquarters were kept outside the Ministry of Defense. We were called attached offices, and you could only approach the ministry with a file, and whether they considered it or not was up to them. The chiefs had no status. They were not mentioned anywhere in any Government of India document. Whereas each secretary is mentioned in the rules of business. So on the in 2020, 1st January, when the CDS was created, he finds mention in the rules of business. So he's the first functionary of the armed forces who's actually recognized as one by the Government of India. So they will talk to him. So with the creation of the Department of Military Affairs, there will also be military officers serving in appointments which were so far held by IAS, IFS, and all these people. So there will be now military people who will have access to the minister. So far, the minister saw the chiefs as a gesture of kindness. If he had time, he would give you an appointment within a week. Otherwise, he would call the defense secretary. He needs a clarification. He'd send for the defense secretary or additional secretary, not for the chief. The chiefs were tolerated. Hopefully, with the new dispensation, the chiefs will be recognized as functionaries of the Government of India, which they are. So I think this whole issue of Department of Military Affairs, the integration of civilians and military officers in the ministry should hopefully lead to a better integrated defense staff, and the minister should have the benefit of advice from uniform, non-uniform, finance, etc. as a whole. So I think civil-military relations as a result of this should grow, but from whatever one hears and reads in the newspapers, it seems that the process of jointness and process of proceeding further with theater commands, etc., is also being stalled by the bureaucracy, who are unhappy at the kind of the transition of power from civil to military. So one hopes that all these hurdles and obstacles will be overcome, and we'll get on with our jobs.
Thank you, sir. So, Vice Marshal Gulani, some of the points for you to respond to, but I would also like you to respond to what was discussed earlier, that what are some of the practical steps that can be taken to enhance jointness? Apart from, we can talk about integrated commands, and maybe it will come, maybe it will not happen. But other than that, there is so much else that can be done where it would eventually make some of these things almost redundant, some of the discussion redundant about jointness. So why is that not happening, and what perhaps from your point of view can be done to enhance it?
I'll just respond to Admiral Arun Prakash on the Air Force point of view again. I think, when you talked of component commanders under the theater command, the Air Force has never been against the air assets being exploited in the optimal manner. Obviously, it has to be done by a man in blue. I mean, if I put the counter argument, will you have a person in blue uniform commanding the fleet out at sea? No. Will you have an Air Force officer commanding the corps into a battle? No, obviously no. So this fact is understood, but we are being portrayed as the villain, and we are not the villain is what I would like to say. I just come back to this point of staff college. I have been chief instructor Air Force over there at DSSC Wellington. This entire debate of making this appointment rotational is stuck on the grounds that the army wants that appointment, and that is how the course is structured, and things. That is how the cookie crumbles. As to say, because the entire thing is so much assessment based that the officer's entire focus during that 1 year has been on getting that grading of a DS. He's not interested in learning what joint war fighting is. I'm being very blunt and honest. You come back, you made this point about how do we make this more effective. From that appointment, you come to the field assignment and you start working in your core div command headquarters, wherever it is. Structures exist. Structures of the advanced headquarters of the Air Force and the Army exist as of today. But are we optimally exploiting them? No, we are not. Why are we not doing it? Because we talk of this, lack of trust. We talk of civil-military relations. We talk of the military bureaucracy. I feel that there is a problem amongst us as well. It is between the military, unless we break that trust and we realize that we are all here to fight the war for the nation and not for the army or for some Rajput regiment or whatever honor, we will bridge this gap. Now, coming to this organization or structure, whatever, like General Raj Shukla mentions, I am also aware that there is some consensus which is being reached amongst the three chiefs and the CDS on this. The structure that, in my opinion, we must have is that when you do have this theatre command and you have resources placed under that theatre command, whichever way it is, whether it is swung from one theatre to the other or it is placed under command, I think this organization of the theatre command headquarters has to be a lean and mean organization which is only looking at operations and nothing else. And you don't, in my opinion, need more than 30 to 40 officers, which are manning this command headquarters and thereafter deciding how the war is going to be fought in a geography or a theatre, whichever way you decide that. So let's say an officer completes a staff college course. He comes and he gets posted to command staff of this integrated theatre command. This is how, I feel we must look at the future. On top of these theatres, when you have at the central or at the apex level under the CDS or whichever organization is there, you have a headquarters there which is looking after operations. So you have this kind of concept which flows down, and obviously, there is no talk all this while of shedding. While we will create these existing structures, there has to be a equivalent talk of shedding some of the existing commands, which because the government is not going to give you additional vacancies to create these additional structures. So we have to talk about that. There is no debate which is emerging on these issues, which I also feel is important.
Thank you. Before I open this up for a broader conversation and bring everyone else in, what is the story that you are going to take from this conversation and talk about? Is it going to be about inter-services rivalry that continues to be an impediment?
No, I would.
What are the insights?
Yeah, I would. I would still have some more doubts. First of all, is theaterization the only way to create integration? Integration is 100% necessary, but is that the only way? As we all discussed, that's not. Clearly, that's a very important step, but that's not the only way. We do create jointness through other ways, through training, through logistics, and yes, then the theaterization comes. Secondly, there has to be a demarcation of a clear demarcation on what everybody is going to do. There's still a lack of confusion in the public and in the media circles as well on what exactly the service chiefs will do and what the theatre commanders would do. For example, in peacetime activities like exercise Malabar, is it going to be under the theatre commander? Or is it going to be under the service chief? I mean, it's a training exercise, and it has some operational implications as well. So who's going to do that? this is very important because even at a time when we already have a DMA and we have a secretary DMA, the CDS, who's supposed to prioritize procurements, but the budget is with the defense secretary. So those demarcations are still not clear in the rules. So a lot of demarcations, clarity is needed, I believe, before we could proceed any further on this.
Integration within the services and with bureaucracy and politicians,
With
perhaps.
Politicians,
Civil
I mean,
military,
will they, yes, civil military
multiple
interface, do they
levels.
have, do the theatre commands have any civil interface, civil representation? That's also something that I'd like to know.
Very brief. I just want to make one point in this point, which are we in a good enough state? Anil also raised this point, Amrita also raised this point. So I think a good example is Desert One. When the Americans, this Iran hostage thing came, they were in a similar state as of today. And all the four services said at that time, no, we'll create a joint force. They trained for 6 months in that single service way. So those four silos of the services trained for 6 months. That whole operation was rehearsed for 6 months. There was a single joint force commander. Because jointmanship had not been nurtured through those theatre commands, it ended in the fiasco that it did. So you have to create these commands where this nitty-gritty will get worked out, that operational integration will grow, as I said, in those 3 wars, how it grew from deconflicted operations to jointness and finally integration. So it is going to take time, and that is why these assets have to be given to these theatre commanders who have to exercise those troops, experiment with them, and jointness will grow then. Even then, there are no guarantees. And the other question, I just want to make one last point, is why I make this point about the military now. See what has changed. Politician, I saw the same thing. I was a member of that committee before CDS got appointed. 48 hours before, it seemed to be that nothing will happen. It will be an absolutely watered down thing. And this thing came from the top. It is the politician who said, not only CDS, here, take your DMA. And one thing I would like, just to respond to Admiral Arun Prakash's time, from his time till now to now, I wonder whether you should use that word, the pendulum of power has swung dramatically in favor of the CDS. It is not the defense secretary. We have seen it on ground. And therefore, the onus is on the military. What excuses do we have left now? We cannot make that consensus. And therefore, I appeal to all my friends that it is time for the military to show some statesmanship. We always took pride in the fact that we were forward-looking, and now if you say, listen, and I've heard this at the highest levels, कि यार वो सब छोड़ दो, ये जो 21 है ना, इसका कुछ करके ले आओ. This cannot be the basis of forming all these commands and all. Who else do you blame? Air power is one aspect. Let me give one more example. Admiral Arun Prakash was the first CNC of the ANC. Why did we create it? To project power across the Malacca, power projection. What have we gone and done? He's the CNC sitting next to me. Defending every part of ANC. The second point I make is that everywhere else we are getting so ambitious. Millets, green energy, Vishwamitra. In national security, why are we so non-ambitious? Ki kuch nahi hona. These are some of the whole issues. It is not just jointmanship. This whole stuff needs to be reorganized. Yes.
So there are a whole host of questions here, but let me open this up for your questions, comments, observations, and there are a lot of very senior people around. Let me start with you, sir. And if you can also briefly introduce yourselves, everyone who's...
My name is Jen Rajesh Singh, and I've joined the veteran fraternity 3 months ago. I retired as the 16th CNC of the Andaman Nicobar Command, and I speak with great humility because the 14th CNC, Jen Rajeshwar, is sitting here, and the founder CNC, Admiral Arun Prakash, is there. And so I've given this example often. We talk of integration today, but 23 years ago, it was a very far-sighted step of Admiral Arun Prakash that on his local orders, Andaman Nicobar command officers, whether from Army, Navy, Air Force, were switched to one common combat dress. But sir, you won't be happy to know that after that integrative step, which was so wonderful, our services decided to change their combat dress without speaking to the other services. So the Navy and Air Force officers today asked me, sir, हमने अपने पैसे से बनाया है, no one asked for funds, and now Army has switched something else, so what do we wear to office? So I said, doesn't matter, I will not follow step with the Army, I will continue wearing the common dress till I'm CNC. But that's in a lighter vein. I want, sir, to take a step back, because unfortunately my perception is that we are getting stuck in the details. There are two orders of needs here which are equally important. One is the higher vision which drives. The devil is in the details, but the policy is by the vision. In the army, you have the army commander's vision, the co-commander's concept, the GoC's direction or whatever. What is the larger vision and why? And it will answer Amrita's questions. Do we have the luxury of theaterization or not? I don't think that's an option. We've heard wise panelists say why. But why are we thinking of theaterization? To reduce the decision time. Because today's warfare, which is played out on television, has fast response timings, which may not be possible in our conventional structures. So that is one. I will talk of three issues. We are also aware, I've been an MA as a colonel to an army commander, and I was very impressionable, and I asked him, sir, when you get together and I drop you off and I come back, you must be having lots of strategic discussions. And he smiled. 7, 8 years down the line, I was a brigadier, I was a senior PSO to an army commander for a year. He couldn't brush me off so easily when I asked the same question. And he said, you'll learn in your time. I spent a year in military operations as an ADG, and I used to be there as that agenda. And then I spent time as a CNC. I would put it politely by saying we have 10 hours in a day, roughly 10, 9, 11. But if those hours are that twice a year I have to visit my regional commands because I have to write a confidential report which can get challenged in court, so twice a year, then I have to go around, then I have to go and do X, Y, Z, it leaves me little time. And my operational thinking is being done by major generals and brigadiers. So is the army or the navy or air force being commanded by major generals or brigadiers? I need someone operationally hands-on for today's response timings. And if that is so, then I agree with Vice Marshal Gulani that he has to have a focus on ops. So if there's a focus on ops, then automatically we come to know there cannot be backseat driving from someone if you are segregating ops. And I agree with that, General Raj Shukla, that you have to have a 4-star CISC. If you have a 4-star CISC, you have to have a 4-star theatre commander. And the moment you have 4-star theatre commanders, you remove the effects of backseat driving by service headquarters. Because no turkey votes for Thanksgiving dinner. And I would like to say, Admiral Arun Prakash, sir, what has changed majorly amongst these 16 CNCs? What has changed is, sir, that we have to look at the integrated theatre command of Andaman Nicobar Command with two prisms. The prism before the CDS was formed and the prism after. In the same group of ministers' report, tabled in Parliament, it said that there should be a CDS. But we didn't appoint a CDS for 18 years after ANC was... we were the first of the tri-service organizations, 2 months before headquarter IDS. 8th October we were raised, 2001. But our raising directive says that the Commander-in-Chief Andaman Nicobar Command will function under the CDS until a CDS is appointed as an interim measure. So what happened before a CDS got appointed? Like a puppet, we were managed by the service headquarters for our different components. Today, we have come into our own, and the last 2 years have been significant. So first, I will just 3 points I said. The decision cycles. That is the driver. We no more have the luxury. Someone said a nice thing, no pressure on military, strategic military consequences, what General Raj Shukla said. And Admiral Harsh mentioned, it's a question of national security survival. So it's no more an option. Next, the elephant in the room has been brought out by General Raj Shukla and the others. The elephant in the room are those 4-star ranks or the 3-star ranks. What happened? So if we understand that a faster decision cycle cannot happen with an extra layer, that means those 13 geographical regional commands and the rest are those training and others have to go. So if they have to go, 60% of our ranks are select ranks. 60% of them are in these 13 headquarters. What happens to them? The pyramid is already so steep, but where will these officers go? So the HR dimension is what is driving the responses of all services. When I, as a CNC, used to speak to the Navy, they would say our strength is 68,000, 69,000. We have only 3 CNCs. So we want the appointment of Sincan to give for the Maritime Theatre Commander, which was outside their charter actually. Why does the Air Force with double our strength have 7 CNCs? Army has got 14 million, they've got 3 million, you have got 7, they've got 7. So this is, I've heard from the Navy, my colleagues, and I'm talking of serious stuff who are CNCs. So therefore, this is the hidden elephant in the room. And if we get our act together and put to the government that these are the operational dividends which will obtain from XYZ, and I'm sure what General Raj Shukla said, the government would be able to put it in step. But we shouldn't start by saying that we want these many ranks. It has to follow a logic process. The second one, optimizations. If you have been at Andamans, you understand what integrated response timings are. In the persona of the CNC, we had some requirement which happened one day before Muharram evening. It was 4 o'clock. If I was not an integrated command, I would have had to speak to a service vertical. 21 Muharram was over a Thursday, there was one working day and 3 holidays, that long weekend, you wouldn't have got that decision. If you go through Chiefs of Staff Committee and a particular chief is out of station, will you wait for him to come back to take a decision? They are operational decisions of operational timelines requirement. So therefore, that integrated decision happens from an integrated headquarter, and I don't think it should be lean. The moment you remove those regional commands, it would be a heavy headquarter, which will encompass everything with an element of the service and the regional coming up. And I agreed with the Air Chief when he spent 3 days with us. He said, Ajay, our strength is in our bases. I fully agree, sir. Air Force strength is in its bases. But then, why does Air Force have 5 regional commands? For a strike package, you can move him from one command to the other, and this is done by Air Headquarters. Is it anyone's argument that Air Headquarters can do it if it's in Vayu Bhavan, cannot do it under CDS? And if that is the argument of unitary of force, then why does Air Force have 5 regional headquarters? So I want to put this elephant out of the room and focus on the operational issue. There would be great operational dividend, Amrita, not Aarti. There will be great operational dividend when you reduce a layer and integrate. There will be great financial dividend. I've been a DG financial planning. When you say that remove this, what Admiral Arun Prakash mentioned about 3 helicopter training schools, there will be pain, there will be angst. I've written a paper which I've shared with Harsh where we can put out the HR issues from our own perspective in our personal branch. And the last point in this was optimizations which become inherent to this. But again, I will take it back to that span of control. If someone is focusing, what some of the eminent panelists have brought out, HR issues, turf issues. I'll give you one simple example. In 2017, an order was passed by the Ministry of Defense that there will be no Army land, Navy land, Air Force land, and Coast Guard land in Andamans. It will all be SINCAN. SINCAN is a naval acronym for Commander-in-Chief, Andaman Nicobar. It will all be SINCAN land. But it's not SINCAN land. It's Government of India land. SINCAN is only a custodian. But the moment those custodians fight over turf, I was personally present in MO Ops room. When an Army LWE DG was saying, sir, the Navy has asked for so many acres of land at Dollygunge to make an ammunition depot in Port Blair, but we've been asking them for 1 acre in Bombay. They haven't given us, we won't give them. So there are important issues of integrating this government land across Indian peninsula to say that this will all be CDS land. And the custodian will continue to be the service headquarters. There are these integrative measures which are required. And I couldn't agree more with Admiral General Raj Shukla. It's long overdue, strategic military consequences, cross-pollination required, Harsh, national security survival, and Admiral Arun Prakash, 3 years of logistic integration. It's been there for 23 years in ANC. We don't have to go outside to see it's possible. But at some stage, I think we've reached that little impasse where the turkey won't vote for Thanksgiving dinner. At some stage, we require the equivalent of a Goldwater Nichols Act. Everyone knows what's out there. The enemy at the gate will not wait for us to get our act together.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I am General R.S. Yadav from the USI of India. The start point is 2 adversaries and half internal. That's what was being talked about, 2.5 front war. Let's take it 2 front, those are the external ones. And 17 commands to fight. There ought to be a disturbance. The system is not good enough to respond. And therefore, a decision was definitely taken that we should go for theaterization, the models being the US and the Chinese model, right? Now, what has gone wrong, that the first time the Prime Minister talked about it was in 2017, 2019, 15th of August, it is 4 years now that he announced the first CDS. Nothing has moved. Why it has not moved, we have been giving various points have come out. But the basic thing is that you ought to have a start point for everything. I believe that the start point ought to have been a vision document where everybody should have been consulted, a vision document drafted to say that this is what we want to achieve 3 years later, 5 years later, 10 years later. And then we can draw up the execution in phases. But that has not happened. There is another point related to it. Vision document has not come about because the decision has not been taken whether to follow a top-down approach or a bottoms-up approach. What has happened in the environment is possibly just because we want to, satisfy everybody's need in a peculiar situation, we have gone bottom upwards, which has failed. There are 2 things which are being talked about. 2-front threat and 2-front war. when we will try to draft a document that is a vision document for the Indian security, it will be based on two-front threat as to how the nation views it, how can it manifest itself, and how best we can address. If we go for the bottom-up approach, every person, it happens that the enemy is right in front of me. So you want maximum resources. Now that can't happen because the Air Force will say, I want 45 squadrons. Army will say, I want so many troops, and same will be with the Navy. So therefore, I feel the second point to be taken note of is which approach do we want to take? Bottoms up or the top-down approach? It has to be, then only the vision document will come out. One more point which is there is, we have just finished a project with the DRDO last 1.5 years on strategic decision-making tool in which 3 CNCs equivalent of the Army, Navy, Air Force sat together. Let me, because Admiral Arun Prakash took that point, so let me elaborate that yes, there have been, I will not say that they are trying to oppose the thing, but the Air Force has been making a point because the House is, let's put it at ground level. Today, there are n number of Air Force commands, whether it was 42 squadrons or whether it is 30 squadrons today, they are distributed in those commands. As when an emergency takes place or the operations are imminent, the chief decides as to how those resources are to be distributed to meet a particular eventuality. Tomorrow, when we make 3 theater commands or 4 theater commands, whatever might come across, those squadrons will still be distributed in those 3 or 4 things. But there is no stipulation or restriction going to be there that these resources on need-based cannot be moved or given to another command. And the chief of the Air Force will be sitting on the top table along with the CDS to decide on optimal utilization of those resources. So I do not know what is going to change. And the last point is Amrita's point, integration and jointness. Integration and jointness is not going to dictate theaterization. Theaterization ought to come first. Integration and the other factor will follow automatically. Let's take the example of corporate. Our children are moving every 2 years. They're hopping from one job to another. The moment they are put into a central room, whether by Tatas, whether by Birlas or by Ambanis, they just come around. It might take a different way for the armed forces to do it, but the integration will follow very naturally once the overall structure is decided. Thank you.
My name is Rahul Bedi, sir. I'm a journalist. I don't aim to either lecture or hector. And at the cost of giving a bit of offense, I was a little disappointed in the debate because I think this audience that is here is aware enough of what is wrong. So cataloging what is wrong and what needs to be done, what ought to be done is, I think, should be taken for granted. What the speakers did not talk about is the operational side of things, which some of the other, like the general sitting here, talked about. Is the operational command going to be with the CDS? Are the service chiefs going to be irrelevant only for training and recruitment and possibly logistics? So, and my next question to the speakers is that this CDS job, theater commands, everything has been in the pipeline for 20 years. What was the military and the think tanks and all these people who were in positions of authority, like the Air Marshal and the General here and Admiral Arun Prakash, what were they doing and thinking about?
Admiral Chopra, sir, I fully agree with Rahul. The debate has been very mundane, I must say, for such senior officers sitting here. We are still talking of jointness. We talked about jointness when we joined the NDA, and we're still talking jointness. The thing is war fighting. This is what we should talk about. India is one theater command and not 6, 7, 8. And you've got a overseas command where you want to go perhaps to the South China Sea or you want to do something else. There are only 2 commands. And the point is that you have to separate what the army calls G from the Q. Ops must be completely out and logistics must be completely out. The work of the chief will then be to build the future Army, Navy, Air Force, whilst his whatever you may like to call him, C&C, whatever, will be to plan for the war fighting. these CDS, will he do the war fighting? Will he have all these areas? Do you need so many theatre commands? This theaterization, I fully agree with General Yadav, has not been thought out as to how we are going to do it. Everybody says theatre, theatre, theatre. But what is it? What does a theatre mean? Are we going to split our resources? And put them, they should be at the command of somebody who is CNC India, who will then decide there's a problem on the China border, Arunachal Pradesh. We want to move some air forces there. We want to move dual troops there. We want to do something else there. We want the Navy to bring in pressure here, etc., etc. But I think, it's been very mundane. And the point I'm trying to make is, we have an Indian example of Op Pavan. And nobody's even studied the Op Pavan. I know General Kalkat very well. I'm not sure if he's still alive. But nobody's even talked to him. What are the lessons learned? It's all gone into, nobody even knows where the files are. We had a beautiful experience. May not be too good, but I thought, because I took part in Op Pavan, many of us have taken part, we learned a lot from that thing where all forces were fighting together. And we have not even adopted that when we talk of USA, China, this, that, etc. All bullshit this is. We need to get down to brass tacks and move forward. Thank you, sir.
Yes, and I think we started the discussion by precisely the point that I think Rahul made and you are making, that this is a long-standing debate, and I don't think all the speakers agreed to that this has been a long-standing debate. The question essentially is that why still we are stuck, and if the debate is not to happen as you are proposing, then maybe there are good reasons for that, and I think some of that came out very categorically, that we can all talk about jointness, but that jointness is not being reflected at all. Sir, General Shukla, do you want to comment on any of the things that were said? And perhaps answer what Rahul was also asking.
Let me try and answer some of the issues. See, it's not that nothing has happened. I'll tell you what happened in my tenure. Ajay can say what's happened in his tenure. So after the CDS was formed, we looked at AD commands, we looked at theaterization in Central Command, in that theater, Southwest Command. People sat, studies were done. Now, there are a whole lot of nitty-gritties, but what interest will those nitty-gritties be of here? I mean, I really don't understand what interest those nitty-gritties, but a lot of that stuff. So if I were to be an optimist, I would say that we are closer to finish than we are at start. Some kind of consensus is being worked out. Now, if it does not satisfy the pace that Mr. Bedi expects, yes, fine. I mean, it's right on his part to ask this question. And that is why the point that I was making, we must execute, because if we don't, more and more of these very valid questions will get raised. So I began by saying that the point of debate is over. We must start, even if we start with an imperfect theatre, a maritime theatre, let's get going with it. So I'm also making that point. In our times, we were given some very specific charters. A lot of stuff has happened, but why do you want me to say that I did this? Or, I mean, say like I was a colonel when Admiral Arun Prakash was the chief. And I've seen him at every forum, without fear and favor, articulate what needs to be done. What more do you do? In a country where there's civilian control, I mean, you can't catch somebody's collar and do something. You can articulate, you can persuade, yet I'll take full responsibility that perhaps we've not been persuasive enough. The second point is, when people say, why do you quote USA, China? My answer to that is, I'm quoting any sensible example. Why do we quote IITs? Why do we quote IIMs? They're also American models, because they've done well. In any case, I'm saying you don't like USA, China, copy the Turkish model, make your own model. I'm suggesting a model. Gulani must have made 10 models, I have made 15 models. So I'm saying the time for debate is over. Pick any model, American, Chinese, this, that, or the other, whatever you want. Here I quoted something because I thought there were some lessons to be. If I am not satisfied, I mean, I can apologize for that. The other point about the service chiefs. Now, see, it is my view that the service chiefs will not be sidelined. The service chiefs will be tasked with training, readiness. Is readiness not important? Russian army, it was, touted as this great second largest army, great leverager of the Gerasimov doctrine. What happened in Ukraine? Hugely unready. So the service chiefs are accountable for that. And within the COSC, an empowered COSC, all strategic military decisions will be taken with the concurrence of the CDS and the service chiefs. It is not that you can push the service chiefs to one side. So they will assume a different role, in my view, a more innovative, creative role, and not necessarily operations. Operations is only one part of it, a very important part, which the theatre commanders. So I think that answers budgets, acquisition, service chiefs. Perhaps will answer some of the questions that were raised.
Admiral Prakash, you want to comment on some of the questions that were raised?
Yes. Well, one can understand the impatience of people from the media, why things haven't moved. Perhaps they need to be more vocal in what they write about. But I think General Shukla is absolutely right. We will have to evolve our own model which suits our conditions and our environment. But we still have to look at others. I mean, we are still chugging along with a World War II structure. So we have to look outside. So first thing you look at is the US model, because they were the pioneers in this. In the US environment, the president is the commander-in-chief, and he actually is the commander-in-chief. We have a president who is also commander-in-chief, but he or she is purely decorative. So in the American model, the combatant commanders are directly responsible to the president of the USA through the defense secretary. The chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff, has no authority over the combatant commanders. Initially, the service chiefs did try to wedge themselves in between, and they used to interfere in the operational role of the combatant commanders. But the Goldwater-Nichols Act put a stop to it. So now the combatant commanders will deal with their ministers. They got a minister each for each service, Army, Navy, and Air Force, and they got the defense secretary. In our case, the question arises that, first of all, let me say that the whole idea of doing this exercise is to transfer the war-fighting responsibility and capability to the war-fighting commanders. So far, it's been the chiefs. They are called Chief of the Army Staff, Chief of the Naval Staff. Chief of Staff to whom? Chief of Staff to the Defense Minister or Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister. But they've been performing the role of being Commander-in-Chief and Chief of Staff. So we need to delink that. So that's one of the ideas, is to empower the theatre commanders as the war fighters who will take war fighting decisions. The three chiefs theoretically should step back and only do raise, sustain, and produce capability for the war fighters. Now it is up to us whether we want to adopt this whole model completely or fiddle with it, modify it, because in our case, the politician is not going to be capable of fighting a war, neither the Prime Minister nor the Defense Minister. He will need someone to guide him, advise him at every step. Who will that be? Well, it could be the Chief of Defense Staff. He could be the person who will help the Prime Minister take decisions and the Defense Minister take decisions. So this whole model, which evolves eventually, will be an Indian model, depending on our political setup, on our environment, etc. But I think essentially the war-fighting responsibility and planning should move from New Delhi to the theatres wherever they are. The lady asked a question about why don't we, decide everything in advance and then implement. Well, it can't happen that way. We will evolve. Even in the group of ministers said, we will have a CDS, but we will decide the functions and roles of CDS as we go along. I think that's quite logical, because you can't suddenly invent something out of the blue. So we will learn as we go along, we will evolve, and we will change. But I think essentially this is it. As General Shukla was kind enough to mention, that we did try our best when we were in uniform, but we had our limitations. Perhaps things are much better now with the DMA and the CDS being, part of the higher decision-making body. Hopefully, he'll be invited to CCS meetings. If that is so, then he can actually help in making decisions, changing decisions. It wasn't so in earlier times. So we had our limitations. That's all.
I just respond to Rahul to say, this. I don't think the discussion. I mean, you probably felt it is mundane, but I've written about it in the report that I think with ORF and RSIS got published on what is the model that we are looking at. So it is something that has been proposed. I mean, a lean, mean structure of a fighting force. It is being discussed. Something is going to happen. It is inevitable, yes. It is going to happen, whether it takes 4 years, 2 years, 3 years. But my only contention is that it has to be thought through and it has to be implemented. We are all in agreement that The time is there for this change to happen, and the more we delay, the more we lose out. But it is something which is happening. But at the same time, when we look at any organization that we are going to establish, it has to be future ready. That means it has to be ready to fight the war of tomorrow and not fight the war of yesterday. When I talk of fighting the war of yesterday, why do we still persist with amphibious assault and para drop brigades and these large, humongous organizations where even the US Marine commanders said that the days of Incheon and Normandy are over? You're not going to see a situation like that ever happening in the future. So while in the military we talk of these organizations, I think there must also be a parallel debate as to how we restructure, and when we do that, what is it that we need to shed. And unless we do that, I don't think the government is going to accept what you're going to give to them.
Thank you.
Can I just make a small interjection, Harsh? Marshal Gulani, as and when the People's Republic decides to walk into Taiwan, there will be nothing but a huge amphibious operation and perhaps supported by a para drop. So let's wait and see how things turn out.
So I know that we are running out of time, but so quickly, if we can have another round of questions, comments, very brief. Manoj, I'll start with you. And I know there are people at the back whom I can't see. So very briefly, I'll take 5.
I'd like to make certain points. One is, given the chaotic process, and I call it chaotic, meaning just recall how the CDS was appointed, meaning they reached down to a 3-star general and appointed me. So I said, so far it's been a chaotic process. Something has been announced, very good, meaning CDS. I support the process, and I think it was a brilliant move on the part of Prime Minister Modi to cut through all the, red tape and appoint CDS. Then what? Nothing has happened. And the problem now is that it has been a top-down process. And that is why I think Admiral Prakash pointed out that the 2001 GoM was headed by Deputy Prime Minister Advani. It was a politically led process. And that's why it reached the furthest. It announced, it said that the CDS should be appointed. Thereafter, the government lost its majority in 2004, and those are different. I'm not going to go into that. My point is, with this chaotic process, if you announce the theater commands now, it is going to be a very, very serious danger. And why do I say it's a danger? I think because you are going to be doing reform in public, and reforming this million-plus military force can seriously imbalance the situation. We're already hearing about various points of view, etc. Now, all this playing out in all these commands, I think will seriously imbalance the situation. I think the thing is that it should have been a bottom-up process. Mr. Arun Singh, I met Mr. Arun Singh in 2001, just after he announced it, and I asked him, Arun, what about theater command? He said, that will come on its by and by. Of course, that didn't happen because he did expect CDS would be announced and thereafter the theater commands would come up. More important point that I'd like to make here is instead of top-down, it needs to be bottom-up for the simple reason, if you look at the Chinese experience or the American experience, the Americans have been at it since 1947. The Chinese, I don't think you people are aware of it, but the Chinese began the process in 2007. They got their Jinan military region where they experimented. They experimented with this concept and they slowly worked on it, and 2014 is when you see one revelation of it. Now the thing is that the Naresh Chandra committee, and I think Arun has forgotten this, but in the Naresh Chandra committee we did recommend that it should be an experimental process. That means you create, and that was the intention. That's why the Andaman Nicobar Command was created. That with the Andaman Nicobar Command, the experience of the command will help us, and it will move inwards into the southern or to the more less militarily important commands like the Southern Command, and then you go up the scale. So the point I'm trying to make is that I worry about the imbalance that may be created by the processes that we are witnessing today. Because most importantly, they are not getting the political leadership that they need. The political command, political leadership, all other processes. China, CMC led it. The Central Military Commission led it, which means Xi Jinping as chairman and vice president earlier. In the United States, everyone knows it was the Goldwater Nichols, this thing. UK also, I think Arun wrote out Duncan Sands and all those people. It is not politician ordering it. The politician has to lead it. He has to be very much part of the process right through. He can't simply say, ki, General Sahab, aap kar dijiye. This is what Prime Minister Vajpayee, when the operation began, I had a conversation with him. I said, तो फिर क्या हुआ? आप लोग पाकिस्तान में नहीं गए? He said, हमने तो उनसे कह दिया था, आप जाइए. But the point is, it's not done like that. It's not done like that, and you need that particular process. And I personally think that unless the process of experimentation is begun, unless you learn from the bottom, choose one command, perhaps the Southern Command, which is the easiest command to choose, and then work your way into the rest of the system. When I'm just hearing the conversation from the senior officers here, I can already see so much dissonance.
I'm Commodore A.J. Singh, formerly from the Navy. I think all of us have done enough purple tenures to have our own views on what should happen and what should not happen, but I'll just stick to two very quick questions, which I just wanted to clarify. Firstly, in this entire talk of restructuring of the Indian military into whatever theaterization, theater command, jointness, there is no mention ever made of how the entire higher defense organization needs to be restructured. The ministry is restructuring. It can't continue the way it is and then expect there'll be a CDS who may be a 5-star. There'll be tough battles with the defense secretary. All these things will happen. So why are we not discussing, why is the political leadership not talking of restructuring the higher defense organization of India? Why is it being restricted only to the largest military restructuring since independence? And why are all of us in uniform not making more of a noise about that rather than trying to sort out within ourselves that we should have been this or should have been that? That's number one. Secondly, this is a point that General Shukla made about, we need to move much faster. We aren't moving fast enough. But perhaps, while, we've all discussed the higher level organization, the turf battles, the C-in-Cs, etc. Very little has been discussed on what is the sort of restructuring of force level that will happen at the lower level, at the formation levels. When theater commands are formed, we can't continue. We can't just make a theater command and say the same battalion, the same brigade will continue doing what it's doing. Then there's no point of having a theater command on top. So is there any restructuring being planned? General Ajay Singh is just retired. He'll probably be able to answer that. Is there any restructuring being planned to the lower levels? Because I don't see in the force level structuring that is happening in the services with the 10-year plan and the 15-year plan of any reorganization of that happening so far.
I'm General Rajeshwar. Actually, what brings me to the debate is this, invitation of yours, Harsh. And I've actually been part of 2 theater commands or joint structures. One, of course, what Ajay said. The other was headquarter IDS, because I had to move since the chief was coming up from the army, which was General Rawat at that time. And I've been also part of the strategic forces at 2-star. So, but coming to your points, actually, I see this good discussion, but I see a little bit of, a point where there is a little doubt over whether we should, have jointmanship and integration at this time. Circa 2023, although I had an army think tank, which is called Center for Land Warfare Studies, but I think I must, we are looking at from the services and from whenever a political aim is given, the operational effectiveness of a military aim. That is what we are aiming at. And we are trying to cut down the flabs because there is a lot of overlap which we should have done much earlier, which we haven't done even till now. So there is a lot of turf. If there's going to be bloodshed, it is going to be there. If you're going to wait, you will wait. It will happen whenever we want to do it. So that is point one. Jointmanship, I am also, I agree that the services need to work a lot towards jointmanship. Pilot project, the first SINCAN is here, and of course, Ajay is here. We have seen what has come off the pilot project. The aspect of any, you can call it theater or sub-theater, if you so feel that, this is not worthy of being called a theater. But what is the outcome of a theater is in the resources it is given, the trust, the jimmewari, which I would say. If you are not going to take jimmewari, we can play the same game as we have played all these years. If you are going to stand up and be counted, then operational responsibility, which comes and translates into two things. One is operations and one is plans. Plans bring you capabilities. Operations have to be dovetailed with training. And then you get the overall, the resources, and then you get the capabilities. Then only we talk business. Today, unfortunately, we have all these things in silos. This is the truth, right? It hasn't moved. That piece hasn't moved. Okay. So, an integration is a little larger construct. I look at, like Raj, other countries which are ahead in the race. You can say our model will not fit. There's no gainsaying. Absolutely. I agree with you. I mean, I would make my own model. But you need a consensus in the model. And I see the wisdom in going, a little more deliberate. But I think we need to take a cue. We have already done Andamans for 21 years. We need to step forward and make the next set of integrated theater commands or substructures, which will lead to operational effectiveness. And we need the person who has got operational responsibility in that theater needs assets. And there needs to be, of course, all the other things will fall into place. My sense is the people will demand joint understanding of operations, joint planning, prioritization of what capability will come first, what will come later. That will happen. But unless somebody is assigned this, and there is this flaw where if the CDS is not accountable for operations, he is not going to be counted. So will the chiefs have to step back? My answer is, or my thought process is yes. Everybody is not going to be equal. Somebody will have this pie is equal. No more money is going to come from anywhere. And India is going to take a long, long time becoming a developed country. And we all know, I mean, most of you are in the media, so you will know it will take a time. So you are going to share these resources. And for a starter, if you want to integrate, you need communications. I'm not going to give you the whole list. But if you don't speak with each other, you won't. So you won't need money for joint communication. Right? So these are the things that are the steps that we must actually navigate. So these are my views. Thank you.
I'm Group Captain Swayam Prakash. I am from CAPS. I have just a few points. First of all, Government of India has mandated mainly for jointness and integration. Somehow this word theatre, this has done a lot of damage. The moment we speak of theatre, we go on to different debate, different domain. India is one theatre, maximum you have two theatres. What we need to have is integrated command. Whether we call it integrated command, joint command, unified command. The moment we rename it, our thought process, tone, tenor, psych, everything will change. So that is one. Second, Indian Air Force, already brought by AVM Golani, we have been the biggest proponent of jointness and integration. It is not only a statement, but it is by action right from 1947. We need to understand this for everything. Today, Srinagar, Kashmir is saved. Air Force was there, that is why. Akhnur, Poonch area, that is saved because Air Force was there. 71 Dhaka is made because Air Force was the final punch. Balakot recently, what we have done, Air Force. So Air Force is always there. Medium of air is one such thing which is required by everyone. It is required by land, it is required by sea. So why you say that, okay, you give me power of everything to land forces? No. Air Force has got system which is of helicopters, fighters. If land forces are having helicopter, can you command the entire air domain of the country? No, you cannot. So let us accept it. Now come on to the organizational thing. The joint organizations existing since beginning are of air forces only. We have joint structures with command. We have joint structures with corps headquarters. We have joint structures with air bases, with fleet. It is that we need to further strengthen those. We must honestly ask that, have we put the right man for those organizations? No. We have put manpower, those who felt that, okay, they are not going in the mainstream, so let them give to the other service. So my point is, we already have these, we need to strengthen those. And Air Force is not the villain. Air Force is the biggest proponent of this. AD command is one example by which we must understand. We cannot, by drop of hat, we say that, okay, we'll have AD command. 3 years down the line, when Air Force did a mission, made everyone understand that today's battle is of speed, it is of hypersonics. Still, we cannot talk today's war with speed of a bullock cart. So when we moved to AD command, IACCs, everyone realized that yes, this is the thing, and probably AD command will not come up. So we need to understand that what Air Force is saying, we are saying based on the fundamentals doctrines. We may have different, our doctrine has got joint thing for both land and sea, whereas it is not so with other services. Probably because our indoctrination has been such. So this needs to be understood. Yeah, and last point, adopt the best practices. JCS of Indian Army, they are the biggest leader, they have got the leadership qualities. That's the best practice of Indian Army. Let other services adopt it. The battle management system, IACCS, this is best with the Air Force. Let other services adopt it. So we should discuss on those things rather than saying that I have, other service has got so many problems and this service has got so many problems. Last, some solution. With this, there will be shedding of manpower. So India must think of, doing lateral entry. Government of India has done that. This shedding of manpower could be at 3-star, 2-star, colonel level. There should be something that, okay, manpower, take it out from defense forces, give it to ministries, give it to universities, give it to think tanks. So this is how we can reach out to some solutions. Thank you.
This is Balaji. Sir, the recent theaterization model which China adopted, right? That is predominantly focused towards its maritime. Despite having its increased maritime capabilities, China is predominantly focused on developing the theater command towards its land forces. So that is number one. From India's side, we do have threats from both our land and from our sea. So what would be exactly the composition of the theater commands? That is what I would like to ask. And if that is so, and how the reorganization will happen within the services, especially for the army. For example, we have 17 army commands, right? So in the 17 army commands, how they will be able to reorganize when you have to meet our threats both in our northern and western borders, and how that will be, that comes down to the Air Force also, and how that will be rearranged with the existing command with the Navy. And also I would like to ask, will the theaterization will have any impact on the way in which the strategic forces command will be operating? That is something that I would like to ask.
I'll not take much time, just a small thing and just a suggestion as well. I'm retired Major Namrata Dasmana and I'm associated with Durban Institute of Technology in South Africa and started with Clause as well. So first and foremost, this word theater has actually created a lot of illusions. I would say we have been integrated right from the day one. And whenever a war has happened, we have been, taking up the plunge with full spirit. Second, I think a lot of new things are coming up. I'm associated with a lot of industries which are with drone. And the major hassle that these people say, the people who are in the drone defense industry, that our people are not ready. So my question first is that our theater commands have a vision of actually combating with the information warfare first. Second, I think our threats are changing drastically and significantly when we compare to the western borders, West or with China. I worked in corporate and similar practices I have seen in just copy pasting the models of West. I'll not take much time. I can see Mr. Pant just having a look at me. But my only submission here is that copying models of West or any other country with absolutely different demography, different troops, different ideologies, without having a competitive advantage being thought of, will this take us ahead? Because we have to be leading in the world. Just not, within our services. Within our services, the integration will be there. There's no doubt about it. Third, my point is to Ma'am Amrita. Whatever expenditure goes of every citizen, even I'm a tax-paying citizen, a retired officer, whatever money of a normal person goes to defense budget, I think that's for national security. And national security goes at the supremacy level. That goes without saying. So the budgeting, when we say about the cost optimization and all these things, when we say about that, where a common person's money is going without, when after having this discussion being seen or heard, I think whatever penny, whatever money a common person spend, and whatever money is going to the national interest or national security, for that matter, I think it is of a very higher interest, because if our borders are not, secured, the problem of illegal immigration, which is another threat, which I don't want to touch here because we are already running short of time, will increase, and it will remain, constant, and we have to break this change. So yeah, my only thing is, if anyone can answer that, do we have that vision of, information warfare coming up at a very, very rapid rate? And how are we actually using these drones? Thank you. And sorry for taking all of your time.
So much, and we have a lot of questions. Vice Marshal, I'll start with you, and if you can wrap this up, if you have any concluding thoughts on this, on the debate, or any aspect that you want to cover. So finally.
Yeah, thank you, Harsh. I'll just touch upon 2-3 points which got raised. I think the structure of what is going to happen to the existing commands, the question that I think there is a consensus that one command each is going to be shared by the Army and the Air Force once we have the theatre commands, and eventually this the raise, train and sustain, or whatever function is there, is going to be looked after by these existing commands. And like I mentioned earlier, the theatre command is going to only concentrate on war fighting and the operational domain, and it's going to be a lean and mean organization. Strategic Forces Command, no change. It will continue to function the way it is. The point on HR, which General Ajay Singh mentioned, yes, it is an important issue. While nobody denies that, I think our focus first must be on the operational effectiveness of our restructuring that we are going to do, and HR issues will subsequently get taken care of. I'm sure the government is going to, agree to whatever the services mentioned. But our first focus should be on how do we get more bang for the buck with the existing resources that we have.
Admiral Prakash, any concluding thoughts and some of the questions that were raised?
Yes, one is that fortunately we've got two sink cans here, present here, and I'm sure they would agree with me that in the Andaman Nicobar Command we have a micro joint command which has been functioning for 21 years now, and all the questions, including the one raised by Commodore Ajay Singh, was how do units, how will they evolve, and what do we have to do within our service? It's all been done in Port Blair. It's a functioning command, logistics, transport, etc. Each service is represented there. There's a brigade head. There's not a full brigade, but a part brigade there. There is a naval, not a fleet again, but enough naval resources. There's a dockyard there. The Air Force, of course, held back. So there's only one helicopter flight there. But the elements of all three services are there. They've been functioning for 21 years. It's a microcosm of jointness. There's been a tendency, including at the highest levels, of sort of running down the ANC and saying it's a partial success and so on. I don't think that is correct. I think it was set up with certain aims and objectives which it met, but the unstated aim was to prove the concept of jointness. It was like a crucible of jointness, and it should have been transplanted elsewhere, or it should have been reinforced to prove a bigger point. But unfortunately, inter-service rivalry, so on, did not allow that to happen. So I think even today, even though it's late, people need, at the higher levels of the services, need to study the Andaman Nicobar Command design, template, pattern, whatever you say, and most of the questions will be answered there. Command and control, component commanders, how will you control, etc. The answers all lie there, but not enough attention is being paid. Lastly, I want to make a slightly snide comment, which I hope Air Marshal Golani will forgive me for. He's been AOC Mao. But in the Navy, if you need fighter support, you have to fill up a form. And you have to submit that form to somebody. And that form goes up various channels, headquarters, etc. And it could take anything from 12 to 14 to 24 hours for the requisition to produce an aircraft. Out at sea, when we need air support, the carrier captain just says launch 2 MiG-29s, and within 10 or 15 minutes, those MiGs or helicopters or whatever will be able. So I think that's a point that needs to be borne in mind, that air power, not the Indian Air Force, the air power is an essential component of every military operation. Everybody needs air power, but air power should be readily available to the commander on the spot within a reasonable time frame. It should stay with them. I think that's the frame through which we should look at air power, not in terms of who's controlling, who's commanding, and missions and roles and so on. That's all. Thank you.
I would just, at the end of the day, no matter what we do, jointness and this whole business of what I call a national security makeover is going to be a very unpleasant task. We have to take the courage to take these decisions. This bit of, bottoms up and all, we've heard many times. So when General Rawat started off, one was this AD and the theatre command, which was the most serious sort. We also started integrating PT schools and music schools. Now we have to understand, if PT schools, music schools is going to be a success of integration, that is one metric we can be satisfied with. But if it is a much more serious business, it is not going to be it is not going to be pleasant. So it has to be today what you need. If you need 3 theatres, you need one for a multi-domain command, one to look at futures, innovation. These are the commands you will have, and the rest have to be downsized or moved left, right, and center. It is going to be an unpleasant task. Why should you do it? I will come back to my point. You see, national security is terribly unforgiving. So what are the consequences of acts of omission? Because we haven't integrated all these years, the RMA has bypassed the Indian military. I mean, this business of filling forms and getting fighter support or 10 o'clock conference is not going to work. I'll give you one example from Ukraine. Now, if any of this is true, look at when the HIMARS came, there were these brilliant precision weapon systems. Then some Russian gaming enthusiasts discovered how you can, fiddle with the GPS. And today I'm told these HIMARS are inaccurate mortars. Now, that is the way innovation, creativity, and all this stuff is happening. The same HIMARS, when they come under counter battery fire, the HIMARS, I'm told, they upstick in 7 minutes. I'm a gunner. We used to take pride in upsticking in 25, 30 minutes. In 7 minutes, if you're not out, you're struck with drones. So national security is getting intensely competitive. And the biggest competitor is the CCP PLA. I mean, the USA says they are the most serious generators of power in recent times. So we have to understand the enormity of the challenge. So essentially, I will end up by saying that, see, this is now whole national security makeover, jointness is a part of it, is essentially a debate between status quo and change, between talent and mediocrity. We have to make this choice. Whatever choices we make, there will be consequences. They could be very good and they can be very grim. As far as opposition is concerned, when Admiral Arun Prakash gave some examples, so if you have to take the service chiefs to a getaway and you can get consensus, do that. But people of the stature of MacArthur had to be overruled, the great Douglas MacArthur, because he thought jointness was not wise. So I am saying there is going to be bloodshed. It's going to be a heavy, a decision which is not going to be easy. But how far are we going to kick the can down the road? That's the question that I wish to ask, and that is why I began by saying theatre commands is just one part of that whole makeover. We have to take multiple steps, and do we realize that the most serious competitor is our neighbor? It is a matter of great consequence. Thank you.
Just 2 thoughts. First of all, as General Singh mentioned, that decision-making, the time is crucial. So do we see theatre commands as flatter structures in the future, which will be just 1 or 2 tiered down, and it will be very easy to take decision and very quick? And another thing I wanted to ask is about the army. We have this, we test-weighted the IBGs. They never got the sanction. So when we talk about delays, if something as basic fighting structure like IBG could not yet get the government sanction, I would really like to know, how theaterization would take shape in the timeline that we are looking at.
So no one has to answer that.
Yeah.
That's for the
Yeah.
tea, that's a tea conversation.
Yeah, that's a
But
food for thought.
On that rather pessimistic note, I think this was a very useful conversation. Though Rahul thought it was a bit mundane, but I thought this was an exercise which not many think tanks and many institutions are doing. We are not talking openly about some this issue, although this issue of integration, jointness, and theater commands has been with us for a long time. So this is not simply about experts sitting in a room and talking amongst themselves. This is also experts talking to wider audience, and that's why I think we have not only students among us, but also media and others who are equal stakeholders in this conversation. So I will just end with two quotes that I rather like and which I think reveal some of the challenges. One is that I think I read in a paper by General Ajay Singh, the only thing harder than getting a new idea into the military mind is to get an old one out. So that's I think the struggle that we see often, and I think Admiral Prakash mentioned that being an inherently conservative organization, what we often see is a top-down approach working in many cases on reforms. And here, Manoj, almost all the reforms in military that I know of, they have been top-down. I know of no reforms where bottom-up we have been able to seamlessly come up to consensus. So I think that's a case for you to study maybe your next paper. But I don't know of any reform where seamlessly without top-down it has happened.
I didn't put it more accurately.
But that's an interesting way of bottom-up, top-down, all that we were discussing. And an American political scientist, Peter Fever, has often said that in a democracy, the civilians have a right to be wrong. So if that is the case, then I think they can push down the reforms agenda and we'll have to swallow it. So on that note, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us, and let's give it up.